All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you I'm Jamie Cashman with the Iowa State Association of Counties, and thank you for joining us for another one of our webinars in regard to the American Rescue Plan. We will be having a series of webinars that we will have and we will be taping that will be recorded and then also on our website. So we have a specific page on the ISAC website specifically for resources for the American Rescue Plan. And so we had one last week. Folks want to go and check that out where we heard from our national partners with NACO and then also with the Iowa Department of Management. And as we are now moving in basically to the next phase from applying for the funds, a number of different questions that we are getting is in regard to the eligible uses for this funding. And so the easiest way for us to answer your questions is sending us an email that we have a special email address to address member questions, and that's at isacarp@iowacounties.org. And so as we will be moving forward, and addressing those questions, we will be having additional webinars to look at the whole variety of different things from, the eligible uses for broadband, for water and sewer, to address the whole issues of revenue loss and public health, and also then for mental health. And so for today's webinar, we're very pleased that we have Auditor of the State, Rob Sand, to join us and to give his perspective on the American Rescue Plan. So Rob, Auditor Sand, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie, and hi out there, everybody. We've also got Michelle Meyer from the State Auditor's Office. I want to thank her for being here today and give her some due credit for all the good work that she's done in the Auditor's Office over the years, too. The American Rescue Plan is big, and there is a lot of money coming out from it. And I'm not perfect and I don't know everything. So having her here I think is going to be great because she can give me backup, and if I get something wrong, she can correct me, and she can be a little bit more focused on the accounting side, while I might be a little bit more focused on the interpretation side. So we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan. A priority for me is going to be answering your questions. I've been trying to do that already quite a bit this year. I think I'm about 25 counties in to the 99 county tour. And if I haven't been to yours yet, I will be. And a lot of the conversations that we've been having out there on the road have been focused on, what you can do and what you can't do with those rescue plan dollars, it's a very important issue. And really, at the end of the day, it's a big opportunity. I think that there has been, from some folks, a sense of obligation and in some ways almost like a little bit of intimidation because the dollar amounts are so huge sometimes. And I think that that's fair and that's to be expected. But it's also just a great opportunity when you think about it to do things that your county needs, that are going to help your county and that are going to mitigate this pandemic as well as any future ones that we may encounter. So we want to answer those questions. We want to make that a priority for you, and we'll try to give you the best guidance that we can. You'll also notice that on our website, we've got something that's available to you already. We are working with ISAC, with the League of Cities, in essentially putting together a FAQ, trying to make available as many answers as we can for everybody out there. The reason we're doing that is we want to help everybody on the front side make good decisions so that all these resources are getting deployed in a way that's effective and also legal. And so we link to the federal guidance where we can. And when people send us questions, if we haven't already posted a very similar answer, we can kind of take the meat of that question and the meat of the answer and make that publicly available to everyone as well. The other topic I wanted to get into today, and we'll do this one first because it's a little bit more straightforward, is public funds going to nonprofits. We've been getting a lot of questions about this lately. And the truth is, what we have been trying to do is make it easier. I realize that that's not the perspective that a lot of people have. The office traditionally, the state auditor's office, has just tried to point out and say, no, you can't do that, as a blanket policy. And we've taken a little bit closer look at the language of the constitutional prohibition and the Attorney General's opinions that say that you can't make donations. And what we've tried to help folks understand is, even though the guidance traditionally has been don't give them any money at all, really what the prohibition is on making donations. But a donation isn't the only way that a nonprofit gets money. And of course, if there's a service that a nonprofit is providing, there's no reason that you couldn't have a contract with them the same way that you would have a contract with a for-profit entity. So if there's something going on, that something in your area is taken care of and doing something that otherwise would fall to the county, by all means, contract for it. It doesn't mean don't do what you've been doing over the years. It means do it in a way that is legally more appropriate and also provides additional accountability for members of the public who may have questions about what exactly that money is going for and what exactly the county is getting in return. And those are fair questions for people to ask, right? At the end of the day, it's their tax dollars. If somebody wants to know what's going on, and it's not enough for them to just hear, well, it's going to a nonprofit, we want to make sure that there's documentation there that can really answer their question with more specificity. And so the communication from our office has not been to make that kind of work more rare. It's not been to eliminate it. It's just to make sure that it is more appropriately done. And the way to do that is pretty straightforward. It's just with a contract. It doesn't have to be 15 pages, 10 pages, doesn't have to be 5 pages. It's just got to have what a basic contract has, which is each party stating what they're getting and each party stating what they're giving, and some measure of accountability for how that's going to happen. And that's pretty much it. So it doesn't have to be complex. Let's take, for example, a food bank. If there's a food bank in your area that you've typically been just writing checks to every year, you can specify in a contract what that amount that you've typically given them is going to be for. If you've been typically writing them a $2,500 check each year, what it is, it's a question of putting accountability on the other side of the check. So if it's for the purchase of food, put that in there. And the purchase of food is then going to be provided to county residents in your county, put that in there. And then provide invoices and ask for receipts back for the purchase of that food. You should be good to go. Because at the end of the day, the issue is you don't want to be making a donation. You want them to be providing the service. And that service then is going to be feeding folks. That might seem obvious, and it is, but again, we're the auditor's office, right? We want to make sure that the I's are dotted and that the T's are crossed, and that everybody's clear at the end of the day to provide additional accountability. So I know that might sound frustrating. I know that it might sound like extra, but a lot of times doing things right is a little bit extra legwork. And again, what we're trying to do is move from our office when we see these things from saying no to saying, are you doing it the right way? Because there wouldn't be any reason that a nonprofit can't provide services. They just can't take a donation. So make sure that you're documenting what the services are that you're getting for the funds that you're giving them, and you should be okay with that. I'm going to try to pull up the chat box here, and we could have an opportunity for questions. If anyone has any questions about this issue specifically here. I'll just pause a minute in case somebody wants to type something in there. I'm not seeing any.
So we do have one. This
Okay.
comes from Auditor Van Lanker over in Clinton County. Wanting to know if, okay, in the past during our spring budget project for the next fiscal year, we request our local non-for-profits provide us justification for their requests for the next fiscal year. Would the justification alone constitute a contract?
Close. I would just maybe put it in the form of a contract. So take the amount they're asking for, take what they say they're doing for it, and then have both parties sign on the line and date it. And that way you have, because once you've entered that contract, legally speaking, it means that there's a real ability for the county to follow up on that donation, right? To go follow up on where that public money is going and see what that public money is doing. It's not quite the same thing if they say, here's what we're going to do with this money, and you write them a check. It's just not quite the same thing. You've got a little bit more transparency for members of the public, and in the event that something goes wrong, a little bit more accountability and an ability to go reach in and see what's going on if you just put that in the contract. So Eric, if you were to just cut and paste, their justification, what it is they want, and put that into a document and point out, what the amount of funds is that they're going to be provided, most likely that's going to be sufficient. You want it to be, what they should be describing to you is, what are the services? What is the county, what is the public getting in exchange for that money? And that should be the focus of their statement to you. And you can just then put that in the contract and have folks sign on it, and you should be good to go.
I would assume then like a 28E would suffice for a contract then?
So 28Es are a little bit different. If you have a 28E organization where you literally have a new entity that is, has a member that's a public member and then also a nonprofit member, if you're already a 28E, you would not need to do a contract.
Okay.
Because a 28E is literally a government entity in and of itself.
Okay.
The dog, I'm going to try to just look at her and see if I can get her to not squeak on her squeaky toy. We'll see what happens. So if you have a 28E, you
that don't have the 28E agreements, then they would just have to sign a contract with that nonprofit then.
Yeah, 28E itself, if it was going to have work done by a nonprofit that is not a member of the 28E, would need to sign a contract.
Gotcha.
If that nonprofit is in 28E, that they're actually a part of it under Iowa Code Chapter 28E, you'd be all right. Excuse me here while I stop the squeaking. Here, do you want that one? Okay.
So we do have some questions about for-profit businesses and how that would work.
She literally jumped down off the bed and went over to get the squeaky toy. All right. Well, I see Christine's question up there. Should we just start at the top?
Yeah,
Jamie?
let's start at the top. Yeah. So what about grants? One of the allowable uses will be for-profit businesses for assistance as a result of the pandemic. And so what is your guidance for that?
So that's a good question. I guess I'd go back to economic development chapter of the code. Because if there's something specific that the code makes allowable, then you're okay in doing that. And so if there's a way, I want to say that is chapter 8 and maybe chapter 8A, but there's an economic development chapter of the code that lays out the ways in which economic development funds can be used. And as long as what you're doing can meet those requirements, then I think you're good to go on doing that.
Okay. If there could be something additional that you could put out specifically in regard for businesses, I think that would be very good. and we'd be happy to send that out to all of our members, specifically just addressing on for-profit businesses, because we might have some counties that would be interested in using the American Rescue Plan for that, to provide business assistance.
I'm making a note of that.
And then, okay, we have a question from Ann Thompson. Can there be encouragement from the state auditor towards counties to use money for local public health agency needs support or strengthen the public health workforce and to carry on the COVID-19 response? And so at the very top of the allowable uses for the American Rescue Plan is certainly for public health. And obviously what we have been encouraging for all counties to do is to form, a work group within their own county of all the department heads, the supervisors, the county auditor, and so forth, to address all the various needs and to come up with the list of projects that you think would be best for your county. So I would strongly encourage all counties to definitely include public health to be part of those conversations. And I don't know if you have anything further to discuss on that.
I second that encouragement. I mean, that is one of the things that is the clearest in American Rescue Plan is public health workforce, public health infrastructure. I mean, all of those things are things that had we invested in them more, we would have been better off before this pandemic. And if we invest in them now, we'll be better off for the next one. The fact that we were able to get 100 years in between pandemics is actually pretty amazing. I doubt that we would make it that long before the next one again. And so, yeah, public health investments are a really good way, a really good thing to do. And that too, if you look at the American Rescue Plan, they're specific about making essentially any changes that you might to public facilities to help mitigate COVID-19. I think the way to think about this is, because a lot of people, it feels we're in a better spot, right? A lot of people are vaccinated, case numbers are way down. Imagine that we're, spending this money, but there's going to be a resurgence. I mean, what are the things that we can be doing to make life easier and to make our work easier if there is, in fact, a resurgence? So those things can be things like creating, with your public buildings, creating, one of the things they're specific about is improving ventilation. Another thing you can do to improve ventilation is to build outdoor workspaces. Put in your town square next to the courthouse a concrete slab with a shelter over it, and put a bunch of picnic tables in there. You could screen it out if you wanted to, so that people, even when the bugs are out, would be willing to use it. Because we know that outdoor transmission, right, is incredibly rare for COVID. It is very, very rare. And so by giving people a place where they can have meetings, where they can eat their meals, where they can do their work, where they aren't necessarily sitting in indoor air, sharing that air together, is going to be something that's going to mitigate that. As well as, you can do pay for your public health professionals in the same way that you would do it for your first responders. And that includes potentially doing it retroactively as well, if that's what your interest is.
And then, so the next question is, where does the County Historical Society and the county libraries fit in with all this? Yeah,
and that's a good question. And Michelle might need to check me on the specifics here, but I know that there's a statutory allotment for historical societies. So they actually went in the IO code and specifically said you can provide funds to historical society.
Right. Yes.
And libraries, I am not sure about. If your library is a unit of the county, if it just belongs to the county, then no problem. If you're talking about funding kind of like a Friends of the Library thing, hey, it doesn't take long to put together a real easy contract, real simple contract, right? We're going to give you this much money, and with it, you're going to buy these many books that are then available to the public for checking out. Good to go.
Very
Agree.
good. Next question from Linda Merkin. Is supplanting an issue for any of the allowable uses for ARP funds?
I am not sure. Michelle, do you have an idea on that one?
I haven't seen anything in what I've read so far about, not being able to supplant the funds. Unlike the original CARES where it said, if it's already in your budget, you can't use the CARES funding. This act, I haven't seen where it even addresses anything like that. If they're going to have that supplanting requirement, it would probably show up in the compliance supplement, which we haven't seen for the new CFDA number yet, but I haven't seen anything that prohibits supplanting.
Very good.
And I have not seen anything either. The only thing that I would say would be, keep in mind that it depends on what that is, right?
Mhm.
So if it's something that you're looking at that also would be mitigating the pandemic, then it's going to be that much easier to say that it's allowable, if that makes sense.
So next question comes from Chris Schwartz. One group we funded this last year was the Iowa Friends of CASA. Their work limited to raising money to support court-appointed special advocates, a government entity. Since this was ultimately to fund a government entity, is this okay as is, or should we have a 28E directly with CASA?
So you funded Iowa Friends of CASA, which is a nonprofit, but that nonprofit essentially just supports a governmental entity. Again, I guess I go back to this. Your contract doesn't have to be 15 pages. It can be very boilerplate. And so if you do a contract and you're using that as sort of a go-between to get the funding to the government entity, I'd lay that out and just lay that out in a contract and you would be fine. Because again, what I would say to all of this is, put yourself in the mindset, step out of your own shoes and step into the shoes of someone of your favorite gadfly, if you will, who sees a line item and says, "What's this? Why are we giving them money? What are they doing for me?" Well, if you have a contract that lays out what they're doing for your favorite gadfly, then you hand them the contract and you say, "Here, there you go." And they might have some follow-up questions, but at the end of the day, you can just sort of say, "Well, it's all laid out right there."
All right, and then next question is, what does our county need in place to be able to contribute to a nonprofit when there is a voter-approved local option sales tax, which is specifically for community betterment? Do your recommendations to contract with those MPOs still apply?
So if I'm understanding the question, Adam, you want to essentially, in a good way, pile on with what your lost is doing. Contract, easy enough. So if you're wanting to do more there, I would say if you want to contribute to that nonprofit that is being funded by your lost, just sign a contract with it and you should be good to go. And again, I know we're talking about taking another set of steps here, and we're going to look in our office as to whether or not we think it's appropriate for us to sort of put together a template for a contract. But it's pretty straightforward no matter what it is. Your county attorney, your county, you got, obviously this is ISAC, but your county has contracted with people before. There's probably a Word document somewhere in your county attorney's office that had that contract. And if you just change the parties and you lay out what the deal is, who's getting what, and then what they're given in exchange for that, that's probably going to be just fine. So at the end of the day, Adam, there might be another way to do it, sort of depending on what exactly the setup is for what you're suggesting. But one easy way to do it is just make a couple changes to that contract and lay it out so that your favorite local gadfly can have their question answered. And when they ask, what am I getting in exchange for this? And then you should be good to go.
All right, next question from Carl Legore. What about providing a location for an emergency shelter near a county campground? When a contract with a nonprofit to provide that service be allowed?
So and Carl, you can follow up here if you need to, but I'm imagining we're doing some American Rescue Plan and some nonprofit work intermixed here. And so if you're wanting an emergency shelter to be built near a county campground and you want a nonprofit to build that building, absolutely, that would be allowed. Yeah. Think about it this way. I think that if you have a nonprofit or a for-profit that is doing something that is for the public, if you sign a contract with them, you can do essentially anything as long as it's for the public. So if you want to see an emergency shelter get built and you want to have a nonprofit build it, sign a contract for it. You know, we're going to pay you this much money. You're going to build this shelter that is going to be publicly accessible for anyone who happens to be at a campground during an emergency or a storm or a flood or something like that. Should be good to go. Same way you would sign a contract with a for-profit contractor.
So kind of in that same vein, our next question from Mr. Feldler here. Contracts for nonprofit and for-profits need to be for services the county would otherwise provide.
That's a good question, Marcus. I would say if you would replace the word would with could, you would be like, that would be it, right? Counties have limitations. There is only so much money that you have, and there's only so many services that you can provide with the money that you have. So, you know, as you increase the amount of funds that are available to you, you're going to increase presumably the amount of services you're providing. And so I would say, does it have to be something the county would absolutely 100% be doing, if not for the nonprofit? No. But as long as it's something the county could do, that is the work of the public, that is the work of providing to the public, then you should be okay.
Next question is from Donna Brooks from Johnson County. We have heard, and we've been on webinars and so forth, that the U.S. Treasury has urged that local governments use the American Rescue Plan funding for direct assistance to workers and for families, including direct aid to households disproportionately impacted. Is there any restrictions in Iowa code for that?
So Donna, that's a good question. I just point you back to home rule, right? Counties, I like home rule. It's a good idea because what it means is, you know, we all have our individual rights, but then as a community, we have our rights too to solve the problems that we experience together. And so I think all of you know this, in case there's one person on here that doesn't. Home rule is basically a provision of the Iowa Constitution that says, unless the legislature very explicitly says that cities and counties can't do something, then they can do it. And I'm not aware of any explicit prohibition on direct payments. I'm quite sure there isn't one. And so what that means is, under home rule, if you haven't been told that you can't do something, you're allowed to do it. And so then, yes, you would be able to do that.
Very good. And next question from Melissa Wellhausen. Digitizing of records is okay, correct? And this is a common thing that we've been getting a lot of requests from counties, from county recorders and so forth, to increase social distancing and so forth as a result of COVID-19. And so it is my interpretation, and I will lean to you, Auditor, saying that that would be okay.
Yeah, and I think that's right, because again, what's the alternative, right? If you're going to digitize your records, then currently your records are not digitized, presumably. If your records aren't digitized, then reviewing records requires that someone leave their house, go into the county courthouse or whichever building it is, and be present with other people while they request the records, probably be present while they review the records, and which maybe takes 5 minutes, but if you're doing something bigger than that, it could be quite a while. So yeah, the digitizing of records is something that's going to mitigate a pandemic of an airborne disease. It's going to mitigate COVID because it allows people to access things from the safety of their own homes, as opposed to going out and sharing air with other people. And I see the other piece of the question here, moving workspaces to socially distance within offices. Yes, that would be covered too. And again, just document, right? Document. Tell when you're making the decision to spend this money, tell how many people, how many workers you have in a room. Take a picture if you want to take a picture. That's fine too. And show how close they are to each other, and then show how much they're going to be spread apart when you're done with it. And then, what you've done is you've laid out for people, look, yeah, what we did is we went from this to this, whether that's written out or in pictures, either way. And then you're going to be saying, yeah, that socially distancing is going to be mitigating the pandemic. And so that would qualify as well. And same with constructing walls and adding Wi-Fi. Absolutely. Because if you're constructing a wall, that's presumably a solid wall, so that air is not going to be shared. Great. Then you're not going to have that same worry about transmission. Adding Wi-Fi is a great idea. I was even talking when I was on the county tour. I don't remember which county it was, but one county is going to add outdoor Wi-Fi in their courthouse. That's a great idea too, because again, outdoor transmission is incredibly rare. You got to be at a concert, standing next to somebody for a sustained amount of time, shoulder to shoulder, for outdoor transmission really to happen. And so if you are making Wi-Fi accessible elsewhere in the courthouse, if you are making Wi-Fi accessible in other buildings, if you're making Wi-Fi accessible outdoors, great. Again, just document, write down, we didn't have Wi-Fi outdoors prior to doing this. We didn't have Wi-Fi in this part of the building prior to doing this. And then you should be good.
All right, next question from Chad White. With the state of Iowa taking financial control of the county mental health, is there a mechanism or procedure in how to use ARP funds to supplement services that are not core services? And yeah, that's a very interesting question, Chad. I know, some of what we have seen and what we have heard is there'll be additional dollars from the American Rescue Plan that will be set aside specifically for mental health. But I don't believe there's anything right now that I have seen in terms of how to document that and so forth. I think certainly mental health would be, along with public health, would be one of the allowable expenses in regard to response to COVID-19. But I don't think there's really any set procedure. As Auditor has said throughout the whole thing, is the biggest thing is to document everything. And as things become known about additional things for public health and for mental health, we'll certainly get that out to everybody. So Auditor, I don't know if you have any further comments.
I guess I agree with what Jamie said there. I guess the thing that I would add would be, it's a complicated question. It's a really good question to ask. And again, with the idea of core services, I would go back to the idea of home rule, and then the idea of, would you provide it versus could you provide it? And here's one perspective to take on the mental health question. Telehealth. If you fund telehealth, mental health services, you can absolutely lay out that funding that is going to mitigate a pandemic, because you're not sitting in the same room as somebody, right? My sister's a psychologist. She actually has found that seeing people remotely over the last year, she thinks for a lot of people has been actually more effective because they seem to be a little bit more willing to open up when someone's not physically present with them, but they're instead through a computer, where it's some weird combination where you can talk to a person, you can kind of see their emotion, but they're still not quite present with you. So telehealth can be a really effective way to provide mental health services. Now, are there people out there that for whom it won't work? Yes, of course. But if you were to make sure that you had an ability to provide telehealth for your county citizens, even if that was something you weren't providing before, the fact that you're making a service available in a way that is preventing the spread of COVID, I think is going to be sufficient to qualify for the use of ARP funds.
Gotcha. The next question from Carl. One is already in place at the nonprofit. If you want to follow up, Carl, with us with some additional information on this at ISAC ARP at iowacounties.org, we'll be happy to get back to you specifically in regard to that. Next comes from Dan Cohen, Conservation. There appears to be several allowable uses that could extend to county parks improvement, sewer and water infrastructure, public health, economic development. Funding could go through the County Conservation Board. Could you confirm this?
Yeah, I mean, sewer and water are specifically laid out in the ARP. Public health infrastructure is specifically laid out in the ARP. And so at the end of the day, your auditor, Michelle might have something more specific about this, but just in terms of the legal compliance, yeah, writing down, we're putting the county money into these issues related to sewer and water infrastructure, and you're going to qualify for ARP. What you take them through for ARP purposes would be irrelevant.
Gotcha. And then another question from Donna Brooks over in Johnson County, public benefit requirement.
Yeah, and I think what Donna's going back to is the kind of the difference between would and the could.
Gotcha.
If you look at those attorney general opinions over time, and you look at that language in the Iowa Constitution, really what's at the heart of it is public dollars need to serve the public, right? And that doesn't mean that every single individual must be equally served. So, for example, domestic abuse shelters are a public service. If you happen to be in a relationship where there is no domestic abuse, wonderful, that is great. But you and I are still served by having those shelters available. Why? Because they reduce the instances of domestic abuse, they reduce the instances of crime, they reduce the instances of assault and murder, domestic murder, and those things are a drain on public resources in terms of police call outs, in terms of danger, and in terms of criminal offenses and locking up folks if they commit criminal offenses. So, at the end of the day, if the service that is being provided is one that benefits the public, then that is something that is going to be all right. If you are, I'm trying to think of an example of something that wouldn't qualify, but is there a line somewhere? Yeah, and I think we can all use our common sense to sort of decide, where that line is. I guess one example would be, you go back to eminent domain in the Kelo versus New London decision in the U.S. Supreme Court. They took Suzette Kelo's house through eminent domain, not to build a sewer or a power line or a road, but to hand it over to a developer. The U.S. Supreme Court said, well, technically speaking, there's no real definition of public benefit in the Constitution. And so if a local entity decides that that's a public benefit, we'll defer to them. But then what you saw after that, and so that was the Supreme Court saying, hey, we don't really draw this line. Drawing that line is not our job. But you saw, I don't know if it was all 50 states, but it was a whole heck of a lot of states that decided to draw lines after that decision and say, we're not going to allow that here. So again, I make that point to illustrate where that public benefit line is. Use your common sense, think about that. But ultimately, if it's allowed in the statute and you've got home rule, and again, you document what that public benefit is, and you're using common sense, you should be all right.
All right, next, I believe we've already answered Auditor Van Lanker's question before. Next question from Danielle Pettit. The pay and the ARP stated it was for March 3rd, 2021. Moving forward, the majority heavy lifting was done for public health workforce by then. Can they allow it for the retroactive work that was done in the year prior? And that is actually allowed, Danielle, and that you can go back from January 27th for premium pay for essential workers for January 27th of 2020. So that is one of the provisions that you can go back and provide funding for. Everything else starts at March 3rd of 2021, and that goes through December of 2024. Can counties contract with public health departments to assist with the prioritization, data collection, data analysis, or evaluation? I don't see why they couldn't. What do you think, Auditor Sand?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. If this is, and I guess, Eric, if you're asking, maybe Clinton, you're thinking the city of Clinton maybe is big enough to have their own public health department. You're thinking a contract between the county and the city. Sure. I'm not aware of any reason that you couldn't do that. I don't think that's explicitly laid out that you can't. So then again, under home rule, you could. And I see your follow-up there. Do you need to ensure contract compliance? If so, how frequently? Ideally, sure, yes. You'd want to. What's the most important thing in there is that you have an ability to, right? So your contract, once you sign your contract, you should do an invoice exchange. But at the end of the day, whether or not you ensure your contract compliance, we all trust but verify. It's always better if you can take a look and make sure that what is supposed to be happening is in fact happening. Is that always possible with every transaction? No, but if you can, then finding ways to make that easier is always great.
And next comes from Supervisor Dieterman. Can you fund chambers and CVBs for lost revenue? From what I've seen, that you actually could. There's a variety of different things for business assistance and also specifically for tourism, from what I've read from the Treasury rules. Do you concur with that, Auditor Sand?
I think so, yes. I'm not certain of it. Another thing that we also talked about recently was if you're at a point where you got to make a decision, you got to hold your vote for the Board of Supervisors, you can always take your vote and make that vote contingent upon approval by the Treasury or contingent upon not having any determinations of non-compliance, right? So then if somebody goes back and tells you, hey, that's not in compliance, well, then your vote just is gone essentially, and it's not happening. So that's sort of relevant for all the things that we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that you can make up lost revenue, and which part of your county budget you're making up that lost revenue in is not restricted.
Next comes from Betty Ellis. I would like to make a county facility handicap accessible, which includes putting in an elevator. This way we can spread employees apart further. This okay? I would assume because of social distancing that would be allowed.
I would think so. I'm just rereading the question here. So again, Betty, I would just say, make sure you're documenting this. Take pictures if you want. Show, here's the situation now. This is what it's going to look like when it's done. That's how we're able to spread employees apart further. Because it's hard for me to imagine in my head what that looks like and why having it be handicap accessible and having the elevator in spreads them apart. Maybe it's because it allows them to access different floors. That would make sense. But again, document that and lay out exactly why it is that this needs to happen, that this money needs to get spent on this thing in order for those employees to be spread apart farther.
Yeah. And then another question from Betty, can you expand on childcare and ARP? I know struggling in the rural communities with higher employees and having appropriate sized childcare facilities for this community. We heard the state will have any grants available for childcare infrastructure, or can we use the childcare facility with the ARP funds? I haven't heard of anything yet from the state of Iowa in terms of so the state of Iowa is going to receive roughly around $1.2 billion, and that should be announced, I believe, sometime in July. So I haven't heard as of yet on how the state is going to spend their money. Could this be used with the ARP funds? I would have to say that if it could be tied directly because of the increased demand for childcare because of the pandemic, possibly. But I think that would be an issue that we would have to explore further. What are your thoughts on that, Auditor Sand?
Yeah, I think, Betty, I hate to say it, but it depends. When I visited Calhoun County a couple weeks ago, and the story, if I recall it correctly, is this. They had a major, like by far the biggest childcare facility in Rockwell City closed down during the pandemic, and it hasn't reopened. That is a massive issue. Because obviously there's a lot of people who can't go do their job if they don't have a place for their children to go. Not all of us have the ability to, work at home and have the dog annoying us with a squeaky toy while we do it. For most folks out there, you got to be in the office or you got to be at the factory, and so having that childcare really is crucial. And so if that's an effect of the pandemic, if something closed down because of the pandemic, then I would say, yeah, I mean, taking some money to get that reopened is going to be absolutely something that you can do. Tighter question, if you have a shortage in general that you can't say was exacerbated or caused by the pandemic. And I know that's true everywhere, right? We have childcare issues in the state of Iowa. A little bit tighter for that. And I think for that, it's hard for me to give a specific, clear answer on that without maybe hearing more about what the situation might be.
So yeah, no, we'll explore that further.
Well, I guess I'll say, I will add this. There's no reason, I'm not aware of any prohibition on a city or a county from having a county run or a city run childcare facility, right? And so if there's no prohibition, home rule, you can do it if you want. If you can do it, then doing it in a way that is effective at mitigating a pandemic would be something that would be an acceptable use of American Rescue Plan funds. And so, document all the ways that what you want to do is going to be careful at mitigating transmission and mitigating impacts. And that certainly gets you on your way, right?
I think that's the overarching message that you have provided for us today, and what I continue to provide to our members is make sure you tie it to COVID-19 response.
Yes.
And if push comes to shove, you will be more on the safe side if you have questions about whether it's eligible, as long as you tie it and document it, as which you described, Auditor, that as long as it's tied to COVID-19, if there would be some sort of an audit and so forth, I would feel safe from the federal government on the allowable uses, as long as it was tied to COVID-19.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm spitballing here. Picture a very large one-story, but just one-story childcare facility that has very large windows that can be opened up or that can maybe be removed, and you've got screens there, so that essentially when the temperature is between 50 degrees, or maybe just we say above 50 degrees, maybe not as hot as today, but that allows that childcare facility to be one that has natural air circulation, because those windows are on all four sides and they are so abundant that air essentially makes that building like being outside. I would think that building a building like that would be something that would qualify under the American Rescue Plan. Now, are you getting a lot of external benefits from building that building? Yes, that's great. There is nothing in the American Rescue Plan that says that you can't do things that would otherwise already be great or already be fantastic just because they're already great or fantastic. As long as you're doing something that's going to mitigate the pandemic, you should be okay in doing what you want. And that, I go back to what I said kind of at the beginning. Think about these dollars as opportunities instead of obligations. It doesn't have to be spent in a way that is, specifically and exclusively addressing the pandemic. As long as it's addressing the pandemic, be honest, be truthful, be very real about what that is. But as long as it's addressing the pandemic and mitigating the ability for spread in the future, then you can do things that are also just things your community needs anyways. That's not a bad thing to do. That's a good thing to do. You're, two birds, one stone. I love efficiency. That's a good thing to do. Solve two problems with one solution.
All right, next from Doreen Pleiner, does quality of life/trails qualify for the ARP funds? I would say, based on my interpretation of it, that it technically would not. It could be potentially used if there would be a revenue loss for your county, and that those dollars could be spent on pretty much whatever the county would like, typically like roads or bridges and so forth. But I don't believe quality of life and trails would qualify for this. I don't know, what are your thoughts, Auditor?
No, I think that's right. Now, I tend to, I would really hesitate there. I doubt that anybody's, if you have, an indoor track and you don't have an outdoor track, well, then maybe having a facility that's regularly used that's outdoors could qualify. But that would kind of be for track. I don't know that necessarily just putting in new trails that get you from point A to point B across town or around town would necessarily qualify.
And then next we have another question about ARP funds for childcare services. So I think that's something that we're going to have to provide some additional guidance on in regard to that and what could potentially be allowed. Again, we'll stress that it really needs to be tied to COVID-19, and Auditor listed a variety of different things of how it potentially could with his previous comments. So I think that's something that we're going to have to explore further and provide guidance to counties.
Right. I'd agree with that.
So, okay, from Donna, so a public benefit, okay, direct payment is a public benefit requirement met. So this would be for direct payments that would go out to,
well,
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, let me put that this way. It's specifically provided for in the federal statute. Like the federal statute is saying this is one form of a public benefit and acceptable spend, which to me means that's going to be sufficient for meeting that in your Iowa state constitutional question, if that makes sense, right? Because in this context, you have people who haven't been able to work, but who also maybe technically under Iowa law didn't qualify for unemployment because they quit their job due to the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, in these circumstances, those direct payments, I think, are not problematic.
Gotcha. And then the next question from Ann Thompson, can the state auditor's office send all county auditors and board of supervisors clarification on the retroactive pay for public health workers? The things that I had cited on that retroactive are in the U.S. Treasury guidelines. So I understand if you want to provide that, or I'd be happy to follow up on this to provide that for Ann.
Jamie?
It's just, go ahead.
If you offer to do something, I'll say, okay. Yeah, it's right there in the documentation. So yeah. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in there. So yeah,
it goes back to January 27th of 2020. So it's very clear in the U.S. Treasury guidelines. And so Auditor Sand, I want to be very respectful of your time as you know, typically these webinars go for about an hour. So if you need to jump off and so forth, let me know. And then we can answer all the, I know we've got, looks like 38 new messages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we'll obviously answer all the questions from all of our members. And, but I just want to be respectful of your time, Auditor Sand.
I can probably do I can definitely do 15 more minutes. I maybe can do 20, but I can't do more than 20. But I'm happy to be, look, this is why we're here, right? This is a big piece of what our office should do. I'm happy to take extra time. If you guys want to set up another one of these, you know, after we get some more guidance, we can do another one too. But yeah, this is important.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, and we certainly are appreciative. You know, no, there'll be several webinars, certainly that we will have it as a result as we get additional questions. And then, so moving on, how can we find out when you'll be visiting our county? So Clayton Ort wants to know when you'll be visiting their county.
Sure.
And to meet with elected officials and department heads.
Clayton, we send it out to local media in advance. And we have someone who also does contact local elected officials to let them know too, typically city council and all the county elected officials. So when we come out, it's Drew Stensland in the auditor's office who does that. If you want to be doubly sure, you can email him. It's drew.stensland, STENSLAND @aos.iowa.gov, and just make sure that you're on his list for when we come your direction. And yeah, it's a public meeting, but we specifically invite local electeds because we talk about a lot of the work that we do with locals, including the PI program that we've got going. So
great.
And then
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I would think that ambulance service is, you know, we talked about supplementation earlier. Michelle and I don't think that you can't do it.
I haven't seen anything in the act, and usually it's very specifically noted.
Yeah, and that I'll say this too. Here's a little, well, the fact that they put it in the CARES Act, you know, that you can't use it for something that you had already budgeted for, but they didn't have that prohibition in this one, is certainly an argument that you could make if someone did want to tell you that you couldn't do it, to say, well, no, we could, because they said it here and then they didn't say it here, which means they didn't want to make it be exactly the same. The changes that they made from the CARES Act to the American Rescue Plan are always going to be assumed to be intentional changes. And ambulance service too. I mean, that also just has to do with public health. So I would say, yeah.
And then next from Jack Wiley, can we use the ARP funds to renovate a former sheriff's office and jail into office space for other county and court offices so we can distance people? And to me, I think that falls in line in terms of social distancing as a response to COVID-19. So I wouldn't see any issues with that. Would you, Auditor?
No, I think that would be, I think that would be just fine.
Okay. And then can you just reference again where guidance is located on the state auditor's webpage?
I do not have that URL in my mind. I could poke around on there a little bit and probably find it.
We can go in
If you
there.
get to our webpage, it's under the FAQs.
Oh, thanks, Michelle.
And then we'll put that link for that on our website as well for American Rescue Plan resources. So we'll have that on there as well. And then does the county home rule come into play when spending more than $600,000?
I think the county home rule is always in play. If there's a statute, or if there's an administrative rule somewhere that says something about a $600,000 line, please do point me to it, because I want to know about it and I want to see what it says. But in general, county home rule just sort of applies to everything. So unless there's some statute that says cities and counties have to do this or cannot do that, choice is yours.
All right, and then we have advocates. Another question from Donna Brooks, calling for excluded workers fund for undocumented workers. Is this allowable use given the non-resident status?
So I'm quite certain that under the American Rescue Plan, they specifically allow for that. And because it would be specifically allowed in the rescue plan, then you should be good to go.
All right, next, how would you tie water quality and wastewater uses to COVID-19? It is a specific allowable use in the U.S. Treasury guidelines. And broadband is also allowed within infrastructure. So those are according to the legislation, that is specifically allowed for wastewater and for water to be invested in along with broadband. So that is specifically allowed by the U.S. Treasury. So to push back on investments in our parks and trails a bit, the height of the pandemic, county and city parks were among the only safe recreational activities could do. I think this needs more exploration.
All right, let's explore it a little bit, Chris. I think one of the complicating factors here is our counties and our cities already have parks. And it's it's kind of a question of how many parks would be enough parks. Certainly the idea of making sure that outdoor recreational activity is possible is important. And outdoor recreation does mitigate transmission of COVID compared to indoor recreation, right? That's a different thing from saying that, we have 6 county parks and we just really have to add a 7th county park to make sure that everyone can do this. And that will mitigate it. I go down to Gray's Lake here in Des Moines multiple times a week, either biking or paddleboarding or walking with Christine and the boys. It's typically very early in the morning. There's not very many people around, but if as you get later into the day, it's a bigger and a bigger crowd there. But even just with that park, even when it's crowded, and it gets crowded, those people are moving, they're walking around. And I think it's hard for me to say that it is so crowded that we need to have another one in order to mitigate the pandemic. Is the fact that I can exercise there a good thing pandemic related? Yes. Is the fact that it's outdoors important because then that mitigates transmission risk? Yes. But I don't know that saying that adding trails, and again, this is going to have to do with your, whatever you got going on in Black Hawk County, document it. If you want to push for this, lay out real specifically, here's our situation. Here's what we would like to do. And here is why we believe that doing that would be an acceptable use of American Rescue Plan funds, and send it over to us. We'll take a look at it. But I'm only answering in the abstract, right? If you were to tell me that you had no paved trails except for a 1/4 mile loop at the high school track, and that's not accessible, during track season or track practice, and if you had more places for people to recreate outdoors, it would be less crowded and more people would do it, then maybe that's a different situation. But I have a harder time, as you build capacity, a harder time justifying that a 10% increase in capacity for that, as opposed to a 50% increase, is something that really is going to have a mitigating impact. But again, I agree with more exploration. We can explore all kinds of things. It's going to depend on kind of the specific facts of what your circumstances are and what specifically you're proposing. And I'd be happy to look at stuff, right? Outdoorsy guy right here. Love trails. Love being outside. Always want to be outside. So if there's a way that we can look at it and we can say, yes, actually, great point. That would be a qualifying use. Awesome. Sweet. Sounds like fun. But that's one that I hesitate with a little bit, because I'm not sure how you measure or explain the mitigation impact. It's presumed that people can already be out, walking on the sidewalk, right? They can walk on the side of the road. That's more dangerous, yes. But being on the sidewalk and being in the parks that we already have is one way to do that. And so not sure how to justify the in-between, but maybe there's some facts where we can. I'm repeating myself here, so I'm going to quit talking.
Next, thoughts on American Rescue Plan for bathrooms, making touchless and new windows that don't open very well. I would say yes, kind of going on and what we had talked about before for HVAC and ventilation and a variety of different things as a result of COVID-19. I think that would be a safe use. What do you think, Auditor Sand?
Yeah, I think so too. 100% on the windows, because we know that COVID-19 is mostly spread through air. So you want windows that open well. You don't want windows that don't open well. Touchless, probably. In the beginning of the pandemic, we talked constantly about sanitizing, and that is a good thing to do, and reducing, the amount of touch is a good thing to do. But we also have learned more that really it's more of an aerosol. So I think touchless is okay. I think that's probably an acceptable use, because again, if you're going from being not touchless to touchless, one of these can spread and the other one can't. And so I think that probably qualifies too. If you were going to really go, and I'm thinking this way because touchless stuff specifically is kind of expensive, right? So if you were to go hog wild and do all kinds of touchless things, I might hesitate a little bit. But if you're just talking about replacing your, maybe an automatic door opener, or better yet, instead of the handle that you use to open the doors, you've probably seen them some places, there's these little, almost like a step at the bottom of the door that's just like a 1/2 inch off the ground, and you put your foot on it and just kind of swing your foot out to open the door. Bottom of your shoe is something you're less likely to touch, certainly something you're not going to then pick up your food with and eat. And so that would be something where you're mitigating touch, and it's not going to cost an arm and a leg either. So.
Next question for Melissa, wanting to know if this is being recorded. Yes, it is, Melissa. And all of our webinars that we will be having moving forward will be recorded and can be found on our website underneath the American Rescue Plan resources. So please direct anybody that wouldn't be able to join us today to view this at that site.
And Jamie, if I can, I actually want to go back to my last answer to Kelly.
Yes.
My answer on that one is a little bit on a personal basis, right? Which is, I mean, and it's a question of taste. My wife Christine and I are very different. I tend to like, super cheap stuff, and she enjoys the finer things in life. So when I'm talking about spending a whole lot of money on making things touchless, I worry about that because a lot of times those are higher dollar items, but there's a different question here, and that's the public perception. So something like that, if you're making a lot of things touchless with machines that have sensors as opposed to like those little steps on the doors, if you're having all these machines with all these sensors, I just hesitate on that because of the public perception of it more so than necessarily the qualifying piece of it, right? So you could say, yeah, we wanted to make everything touchless and every single door in every county facility have a sensor and open automatically. But if you tell that, if you go out and try to tell the public that's what you put this money into, I'm thinking they're going to think there's probably a lot of stuff that you could have done that would have been more effective at mitigation and less fancy, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of it's less about qualifying. I don't know that I can say that you couldn't go make all of your doors touchless. I'm just saying there's probably things that you can do that would be more beneficial to the public and more impactful instead of doing that. Some touchless stuff, sure. Really heavy traffic areas, sure. But I leave that to you and your determinations in all of your own counties to decide that.
Gotcha. All right, we have a few more. I don't know, Auditor, what's your time frame here? Do you need to jump off here in a little bit, or?
Yeah, a little bit. If you got a couple more, we can do a couple more.
Yep, do a speed round maybe here. So transportation is an issue in our county with the initial cost of developing a transportation company. Vehicle building stops qualify, tied to COVID with access to transportation for healthcare and testing and so forth. And I would say yes, as long as it could be tied to COVID-19.
And I missed that one. I typically have kind of been reading along here. Can you repeat that one, Jamie? I'm sorry.
They were looking for transportation services. So I think it just popped up here again. Developing some transportation services for healthcare and then also for testing. Would that be allowable? And I would think yes, that it would be. So I think we're off the chat and now we're to the Q&A.
Okay.
So that's where it's at. The
okay.
Additional.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I only had one of those windows popped up. That would explain it then.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think so. Including the development costs, because that's a cost. And if what you're doing is going to be mitigating, then it's not, you can't just pick a plan off the shelf. It's not like going and buying a new water bottle or a new computer. You're going to have to plan something and figure it out. And I think that would be a qualifying cost, just the way as the actual infrastructure itself would be. So yeah, I absolutely think that would qualify.
And then
again,
go ahead, sorry.
Right? Lay out what your current transportation availability is in your county. Lay out why you need that transportation, right? And then lay out what your plan is for developing it. And then I think the costs from getting from having no public transportation to having some public transportation is going to qualify.
Next, specifically for county infrastructure, but not tied to COVID, emergency law enforcement radios, storm shelters at campgrounds. If it weren't specifically tied to COVID, the only allowable way you would be able to do that would be because of any revenue loss that your county has experienced as a result of COVID-19, and that would be allowable. But I don't see, from what I've read, and correct me if I'm wrong, Auditor Sand, that if it's not tied to COVID, the only way that they would be able to invest in this would be for any revenue loss the county has received during the pandemic.
Yeah, we have your water and sewer, and then pandemic related issues and revenue loss are the typical ones. Yeah.
I would say though, for let's say emergency and law enforcement radios, as you've seen increased demand potentially as a result of COVID-19, that could be a possibility as long as it was tied specifically to COVID.
Sure.
But if it's just something that you were interested in doing before all of this, it would be, you might be having a difficult time justifying that. But again, if we have a common theme, as long as it's tied specifically to COVID-19 response, we believe that you will be safe in using the funding for those purposes.
And I see this question now. It's a good question. I would not want to take Motorola's advice on whether buying their product I can use federal money for it. Because they're gonna look at it any way possible to say, yeah, absolutely, you have free money that you can give us. You 100% have free money you can give to us. I would, and just looking at this in general, I'd be careful with this one because you've got dispatch, you've got radios. What is it about that dispatch and those radios that replacing them is going to somehow mitigate the pandemic? This would be a good one to write it all down, describe your current situation, describe the changes you want to make, and lay out how you think that's going to mitigate it. Send it to our office, send it to Treasury, see if you can get an answer. Because people here want to help you, want to help you get the answer right. Motorola is going to have a little bit of a conflict of interest there. They're going to help you get the answer that helps them close a deal. So I'd go ahead and lay it all out for us in a longer thing and send it to us and send it to Treasury, and hopefully we can take a look at it. At this point, I do have to go. I've got a 12:30 that I've got to get to. But this was fun, and really, I mean, I've seen a lot of comments. It was helpful. Happy to do it again later on if we need to.
No, well, certainly appreciated Auditor Sand for your time today and for your guidance. And yes, this will be one of a series of webinars that we'll be having, and appreciate your offer to be a part of any further webinars. So thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
So to answer the questions that we have remaining, I am willing to stay on and address them if I have the answers, or will follow up with everyone. For Mitch K, will there be any resources made available to verify our lost revenue calculations? Yes, NACO has provided us with a lost revenue calculator that is located on the ISAC website under the American Rescue Plan. And if you click on that, there is that calculator that you can plug in. So that is available on the ISAC website. So restrictions on spending ARP from lost revenue other than COVID expenses already incurred. So all the, if you determine your county has experienced loss of revenue, that could be spent on anything. So if you would like to spend it on road and bridge projects or anything within the county, those funds are certainly allowable, that you can use it for literally anything that the county would like, as long as it was tied to lost revenue. Everything else falls underneath those main categories. Can we use ARP to either build a new ambulance building or remodel an existing ambulance building? I would say, again, if you've seen increased demand as a result of COVID-19, I would say yes. Is this something that you've been planning or wanting to do for many years now? That could provide, you could have some difficulty justifying that. But if you, again, if we have a common theme, tie it to COVID-19. But if this is something that you've just wanted to do for many years now, then you would have to tie it to, potentially lost revenue and so forth. But yes, that could be a possibility. Just replacing bathrooms, would that fall underneath water and sewer infrastructure? I don't know if that's within regard to the county courthouse and so forth. I would say if it would be in result to, COVID-19, I would say yes. Water and sewer would just be more things in line with, community improvements, unsewer communities potentially within your county and so forth. But bathrooms, if there's some things that courthouse improvements, for social distancing and so forth, and we talked about touchless and different things in previous questions, I would say yes. But just for straight up bathroom improvements, I would say probably not, unless you could tie that specifically for social distancing and tied to COVID. So phone system, technology upgrades is a common question that I get. As you have seen increased demands for remote meetings and so forth, and upgrades in phone systems, and also for conducting business virtually and so forth, I would say yes, that could be a possibility. As you have seen increased demand to do that. If this was something that you've been just waiting for years to do so, you might have some difficulty justifying that. But if it were tied to the increased demand as a result of COVID-19, I would say yes. So on the loss of revenue calculator, can someone tweak that it make more user-friendly for counties? So Betty, I will take a look at that, the revenue calculator again, and see if there is a better way to utilize that, or if you have some questions and you would want to contact me directly, please do so. Again, any questions, additional questions that anybody would have, I would send them to ISAC ARP at iowacounties.org. So I will go through some more. Road use tax fund, yes, that is lost revenue. That could be used as in terms of the overall formula that could be added that with, and it has to be considered for a county-wide revenue loss. So road use tax would be one of them. So with that, I think that wraps up the questions that I have seen here. Obviously, please continue to reach out to us with our support web address, and please, certainly contact me directly too. Pretty much everybody has, as you see, my web address right down, my email address down below here on the first slide. So please don't hesitate to continue to contact me. And again, this is going to be an evolving process as we get additional questions, additional guidance from the federal government. But we want to, provide any additional assistance that all of our members need throughout this entire process. Another thing that we had put out this week to the county auditor specifically is wanting to know what counties have applied for the funding, have received the funding, or planning on receiving the American Rescue Plan funding. And so if you could either encourage your auditor to fill that out and get that information back to us, or provide that information through that ISAC ARP at iowacounties.org web address there, email address. So please continue to do that, and please continue to reach out to us, and we really appreciate you being a part of this. Like I said earlier, when we started, this is going to be one in a series of webinars that we will be having moving forward. So I wish everybody a good day. Thank you.